Welcome to the Dr. Dance Mom podcast, your guide to strong dancers with a bright future. I'm your host, Dr. Tara Christensen, doctor of physical therapy, dance medicine specialist, and proud dance mom. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to this episode of the Dr. Dance Mom podcast. I am your host, Tara Christensen, and today we're going to welcome Nicole Perry to the podcast. Nicole is a movement professional. She also does some work as an intimacy coordinator and director. She's done some dance choreography and also just wrote and released a new book. So welcome, Nicole, to the podcast. Will you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to join you. I am Nicole Perry. I use she, her pronouns. I am based in South Florida, where it's actually kind of chilly today. You know, it's like 68. That's winter. And I am a movement professional and movement educator, and I have worked in movement for about 20 years at this point as a dance choreographer for theater as well as for concert dance. And I've been a movement educator in middle school, high school, and college spaces also for about 20 years, as well as dance studios, but also in the academic dance space. And that's what my book is about, is more for academic dance teachers and how do we bring pedagogies of care, which is a teaching term for things like trauma-informed teaching and ungrading and looking at accessible classrooms and syllabus and things like that. So my book is about really creating care in the dance and movement classroom, because I've also taught movement for actors. I'm a certified Laban Bartini movement analyst, as well as a certified Pilates teacher and certified intimacy director and coordinator. So I'm just a big movement nerd. I love how movement tells a story and what are those stories that we're telling and how do we support the stories, whether it is, a dance for a competition or on a concert dance stage, or it is the movement of actors on stage or on a film. I just really love looking at bodies in motion.
That's amazing. That's a lot. That's a mouthful there. So those are some pretty interesting background and credentials, I would say, just because I personally don't think I've come across anyone with your specific background. It's definitely unique and offers a very unique perspective, I think, into movement in general. So I think that's really cool. I love when I come across somebody who has a completely different perspective than something that even something that I didn't even know existed, honestly. So I think a lot of those things they're very niche, but they're very important as well. And I think it's great that we can have conversations about some of that background and knowledge that you have gained through that experience.
And I think that's what's so interesting about the arts in general is when you meet someone who loves dance, they also have a background in something else. Or I have a former student of mine who I just ran across on TikTok and was like, oh my gosh, I remember the student they took class with me in middle school, and they are now a physics master's candidate somewhere. But I was
Wow.
like, yes, of course, bodies in motion, right? And super, super smart person, but has expanded their knowledge in these new fields, in a field I know nothing about. And I'm like, but I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, I can see how dance pulled you into that. And I think theater people too, they tend to read a lot of stories, and then we can geek out about literature or the
Yeah.
newest book. So it's very fun. But I think I tell people all the time, it's actually even in the book, that when I learned about intimacy directing and intimacy coordinating, it really changed how I did everything, because I actually came to that work as a dance teacher. I was teaching in high school and middle school and was looking for ways to support students in the high school musical,
Okay.
because there was a kiss, like there often is in a musical. And the director hadn't said it, hadn't really talked about it. And one of the students was very, very nervous. I was choreographing the musical. And one of the students was really nervous. And they came to me and they were like, can you help us like create this moment? And I was like, oh my gosh, that's just really, that's a lot, right? To think about kissing as your like job
Yeah.
for this
At that
musical
age. Yeah.
at that age. And that's part of why this student was very nervous, is because they wanted to make sure that they like did it right. Because if they did it wrong, then their classmate and friend might think that they were a weirdo, right? And
Yeah.
that's terrible. But they also felt like if I do it wrong, I'll ruin the whole show. And that's so much pressure. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is just a bananas thing. Because also in high school theater, we teach you like how to do everything. We're like, this is what the word blocking means, and this is how you write it down, and like this is what this word means in the script, and this is how a rehearsal goes. Like we teach you everything.
Yeah.
And at no point are we like, just figure it out for yourself. Like we might be like, make a choice, try something, but we're never like, good luck, kiddos. And that's kind of how the student felt, is that they were just left to figure this out with their scene partner. And I was like, that's wild. So I started looking for places to support my own knowledge as a teacher. And hot tip, teachers, do not ask minors to kiss. That's illegal. Um, so that's what we learned in that, is that we probably shouldn't be doing that anyway. But that's how I ended up in intimacy director training, was just looking for ways to support students to feel confident in doing weird stuff on stage and doing hard stuff on stage. And I ended up learning just so much more, particularly about how power and power dynamics influences our ability to say the things or do the things that we feel like are right for us or are the right choice for us in this moment. But because the teacher is our director, or the teacher is our choreographer, or the teacher's picking students to be in the piece,
Right.
that we feel like we have to do things to please them instead of the things that feel right for us. And that light bulb changed everything about my teaching.
Yeah. That's a huge one. I think that's a great topic to kind of speak a little bit more on as well. In terms of power dynamics, we talk a lot about, I did a few episodes on studio culture. And I think one of the biggest things, at least in the competitive dance space, is definitely sort of the perception of those power dynamics for sure. And it does orchestrate a lot of what happens on the studio level within the kids themselves, within the parents. So a lot of that power dynamic, or the perception of the power dynamic, is really what guides a lot of the culture within the studio. And I don't know that it's intentional all the time. I think sometimes it's just perception and not necessarily intent. However, it's there, and I that's something that I think definitely should be spoken on and acknowledged a little bit more than it typically is.
Yeah, and I think teachers in a studio often are so aware of the power that they don't have, right? They're like, the studio owner has set the class times, and the studio owner maybe decides what competitions we're going to and gets final approval over the song or the costume. And so, studio teachers, I think, often, even academic teachers, as a person who teaches in academic spaces where decisions are made by upper admin, we feel the power we don't have really, really strongly. And then we forget that in our individual classrooms, we are the power holder. And to those students who are interacting with us in that moment, we are the most powerful person in the room. And so that those are influencing them. And like perception is reality, right? Even if a
Yep.
student thinks that I've put them in the back row of the dance because I don't like them, right? I know I'm a very tall person. I was always in the back row of the dance. I'm about 5'10". I am tall,
Yeah.
right? I was always in the back row. I'm
Hmm.
there because I'm tall
Hmm.
and people can still see me, and that's how formations work. But if I put a student in the back and they think it's because I don't like them, it doesn't matter if I, as the teacher, know it's because they're tall. Our relationship is going to be influenced by the idea that I don't like them. They're going to act, choose, behave like I don't like them, and it's going to change our dynamic in the room, right? And if a student wants to impress me when I come in and teach because they know I work at all of these places outside, that's going to influence how they act, choose, behave in the room because they want me to think a certain thing about them. And those power dynamics are real. And we don't talk about them enough, or when we do, we talk about them as like just the way it is. But then we forget that ripple effect part of like it's affecting how we're interacting with each other right now. And we always talk about dance as like we want dancers to be authentic. We want you to bring your whole self. Well, they can't do that when the choices are being influenced by those power dynamics. We're not really getting anyone's authentic whole self. We're getting it through the lens of that power dynamic. And maybe maybe that is the way it is, but we should remind ourselves of that and validate for students that that's real. If they're feeling those things, that it's real,
Yeah.
and not pretend like it isn't occurring or like gaslight them about
Yeah.
like you don't have to feel that way. Okay, they don't have to feel that way, but they do.
But
So
they
now
do.
what?
Yeah. And even what comes to mind for me is even just the communication between in the scenario that you just described between the teachers and the students, maybe even just talking about or educating them on like formations and how spacing is done in formations and why spacing is done that way. And so that the students themselves understand that, oh, I'm not being punished for being in the back. It's not that the teacher doesn't like me. It's just that I'm taller than my peers. And if they put, you know, my friend who's in the front in the back, nobody's going to see her. Right? Like
We'll
that's so
never see
simple.
her.
It seems so simple, right?
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of those sort of unspoken traditions or unspoken habits in a dance studio that we just accept
Yes.
and we don't explain. And then students don't know, parents don't know. Maybe we as the teachers don't even know. We're just doing it because it's what our teacher did and it
Yeah.
worked. And we're
I
like,
feel
oh,
like
I'll just
that's,
keep doing that. It's like,
yeah.
what's really behind these choices that we're making? And like I think of dress code as like another one of those. And it's like, yes, we want to see their lines for both aesthetics and safety, and we don't have to have like a genderized dress code or is punishing a student because their leotard is the wrong shade of blue for that level like really the way to do it. The other one that comes to mind is like calisthenics as punishment. And it's like they're
Yeah.
talking too much, so we'll make them like run or do push-ups or whatever. That's a
Hmm.
really old school way of classroom management, which is the word that freaks me out. But we're actually teaching students that like making your body do this kind of conditioning work is punishment instead
It's
of this
punishment.
conditioning work being something that we need as dancers.
Right.
And
The
and also
intent
like
behind it.
yeah, like do we need to punish children for being children? I don't know. But I think there's a lot of those things in studios that we leave unexamined that if we took the time to actually be like, why am I doing this? And could I explain it to a student? Could I explain to a student the reason behind it? And maybe take the time to do it.
Hmm.
Where would that leave us? And I think it would, transparency and communication is so much of disrupting power dynamics, but also of avoiding unnecessary conflicts because the
Yeah.
expectations were unknown or
Hmm.
like I hold them because it's just the way it is for me, but I've never actually communicated them to students.
I think for me that's it right there is I think there's a lot of differing opinions on some of these things. I think for me it's it's the communication is what it comes down to on the classroom level and even on the parent level. You know, if you have these expectations and they are very well communicated and they are reasonable and they are age appropriate, and you have students who are not meeting the expectations in class in terms of behavior or whatever else it may be, then if you know that you've communicated those expectations clearly for everyone to understand, then yes, understand that maybe some action needs to be taken to and I'm not saying what that appropriate action would be, but to, you know, maybe teach the student what's appropriate and not appropriate in the classroom. However, I think there's a lot of examples that I've seen or have been given by other people where those expectations are not clearly communicated and they're just assumed. It's just assumed that this is how we, you know, conduct ourselves in the classroom, but there's no specific expectations given. And so I think, especially with children and children who are, you know, growing and learning, those expectations need to be communicated clearly and they need to be communicated often. And so I just think the other piece of this, the flip side of this for me, is also the qualifications of the teacher. And so I think a lot of teachers, dance teachers at least, you know, they may be a former dancer who just happens to step into a teaching role, but doesn't necessarily have any, you know, training on classroom management or handling that, you know, that age group, a group of kids. I know for me, it's challenging when I step into a workshop. I have to really kind of explore like the proper way to manage that classroom
Mm,
setting. I'm used to working one on one with people. And so that's a learned skill. It's not something that you just step into and know
yeah.
automatically. So I do believe that mentorship is important for the teachers, especially younger teachers that are just stepping into teaching for the first time. And I think that that is just a good pathway to establishing, you know, better expectations, better communications, and you know, helping to ease that kind of perception of power
Yeah.
inequality,
Yeah,
maybe.
and dance is such a hierarchical art form of
Hmm.
like
Yeah, it is.
the choreographers over the dancers, the teachers over the student, right? You come
Hmm.
in and you do the thing, which is also a little bit wild to think about because we're like, your body is the instrument. And then we're like, don't listen to your body. Do it like this. No, you
Hmm.
can't go to the bathroom right now. Like, all
Yeah.
of these things that actually shut down how we listen to bodies when we're in a classroom. It's like,
Yeah.
you're not supposed to listen to your body. You're supposed to look as much like the teacher or the choreographer as possible. You're not supposed to go to the bathroom or go get water right now because this is class time.
Hmm.
And we have this really conflicting art form that is like we want your body, but only our way, only the ways that
Yeah.
we've decided is appropriate, and
Hmm.
especially for dance teachers that are coming in maybe from like a professional career, but without a lot of pedagogy training, we forget that the classroom is really a
Yeah.
different space than the rehearsal space. And honestly, most dance teachers don't have pedagogy training because most, a dance BA degree
Hmm.
will have like maybe one or two education courses that may or may not be dance specific. Like they may require students, this is how it was when I was in school, but that was a long time ago. Um, like one of the classes was through the education department. And so it was more about working in a classroom in general, not necessarily a dance classroom. And then we had a dance classroom specific one. Um, BFAs don't usually have any pedagogy classes because they're all about the creation of dance and being a dancer and a choreographer. So they're not necessarily getting any higher education courses around teaching. And then there are some schools that do have pedagogy specific programs. It's like there's a real unevenness in training for our teachers, and it's why like professional development is so important. And
Right.
I wish that more dance studios invested in professional development for their teachers. If it's
Yeah.
not a studio-wide program, but if it was like funds for getting more training, because there it is professional development for dance teachers out there. It's just I don't think it's encouraged or expected maybe as much as it could be.
Yeah, and there's no requirement for it. And this is like a topic that I keep circling back to in a lot of these conversations is there's really no governing body for dance in terms of like concert dance, competitive dance. There's no oversight. So when, someone decides to open a studio, there's, they're creating their own accountability standards for themselves and for their teachers. And so there's no requirement that their teachers do those professional development classes. You would hope that they would invest in that for their teachers and the development of their program, but it's not required and there's no one that's going to hold them to that. So I feel that that's a bit of a gap in terms of where a lot of this stuff comes in.
I think that's
So
so important too with accountability. I do workshops a lot for theater companies, and I always request slash require I require that theater companies that are having me come in and do a workshop about like power and consent have a chain of communication of like what do we do when things go wrong, because things do go wrong, and it needs to be robust. It's not just go to the director, right? There has to be a way to do it that is direct. There has to be a way to do it that is anonymous. There has to be a way to do it that sort of makes it a lateral move instead of escalating the situation. If you have unions, there has to be all of those things included in that. And I think that's another simple step that dance studios and dance companies can make to
mhm,
support the safety of students, but also the safety of their teachers. It's like we have planned for things to go wrong, not because we think anyone is a bad person, but because misunderstandings happen, expectations don't get communicated, and humans are messy and stuff goes wrong. This is a space where we touch each other. This is a space where we work on maybe sensitive and difficult topics. There's going to be problems. So how do we deal with that? And it can't just be call the studio owner, because what if they're the problem? And it can't just
right.
be leave an anonymous comment in a box in the lobby, because that allows for no context and no follow-up, right? So there has to be
Right.
a way to do those things as a whole. And I teach a class for NDEO, which is the National Dance Educators Organization, on the ethics of teaching with touch. And they write as their final project over the 6-week course, like their touch policy that's either going in their studio handbook or their class syllabus or a dancer contract or whatever. And one of the requirements of that policy is a chain of communication. Like if I'm the choreographer and I violate my own policy, what are the steps that this person can do? Is it shows then also the person who is not in power that I'm really serious about what I say. I want to live up to the expectations that I've set for myself, and you can hold me accountable.
Yeah, and it shows that you actually care about the students. And I think one of the things that I see working with competitive dancers is, and this is even in safe spaces where they can communicate with their teachers, they don't want to. They don't want to advocate for themselves. They're afraid to. And this is, like I said, even in spaces where I know the teachers and I know that they absolutely can communicate with them, they're still scared. They're afraid to speak up. And so that's a tough one because I think there's a lot of unsafe spaces where they certainly don't feel safe speaking up,
Yeah.
and there may be some sort of repercussion for speaking up.
Yeah.
But even in the and so I feel in my role as a healthcare provider, if I have a dancer who's injured, I'm always teaching them about self-advocacy because I feel very strongly about that. I have two daughters myself. I feel like it's really important that from a young age, they do learn how to speak up for themselves, even in the situation where there's some perception of power imbalance, because silently just kind of moving along and deferring in silence, I don't think is the right answer. And sometimes they're even afraid to tell their parents because they know that their parents going to go to the studio director or the teacher and let them know that they're injured. And so I
Yeah.
think this is a huge problem that I see with injuries not being reported, and things like that until something happens in class and now they're really injured, and now
Mhm.
we're 4 weeks out from their first competition and we're triaging an injury that could have been prevented if they had just come in when it first started hurting or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that's a tough one. I also
It
feel that there are
is.
certain personalities that are worse than others, where they're like, well, I feel like I could talk to this teacher or that teacher, but if it happened in
Mm,
this one's class, absolutely not.
yeah.
And so I think that's a huge problem.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing I think we forget as teachers, and even as parents, maybe I'm not a parent, is that when we tell students, like, oh, we want you to tell us if there's a problem, we want you to come to us, this is a quote unquote safe space, right? That we're going against their ingrained experience of maybe 1 year before. With college students, I'm looking at over a decade of experience that possibly has been literally beaten into them
Mm-hmm.
of like, don't complain, don't ask questions, you're not hurt, you're as of course they don't believe me that I say I want you to come to me with questions, I want you to call me out if I go against the expectations I've set,
Yeah.
because that's not been their experience for however many years before. The experience of academic classrooms and even of many dance studios is like, be quiet, listen to the teacher, do what the teacher says, go home. That's
Yeah.
it. And so just subverting those expectations, that usual social contract of this is how you act in class, with something like, you can ask me questions, you can tell me if you don't want this kind of touch, can be really disorienting for students. And why would they trust us when that hasn't been their past experience? And to remember that it's like, it's not really about us as the teacher being an untrustworthy person, is that their experience hasn't proved that out. So to
Mm-hmm.
be consistent in offering that, and then when something does come up that a student says, like, oh, I don't feel that great today, that we meet it with compassion and curiosity and not dismissal. So the next time they can be like, oh, actually, I have this injury. When it's something little, that we meet it with the grace that we say that we want to. And it's again why I think having a communication policy with a variety of outreach points is
Yeah.
helpful. If it is that teacher, that then there's a recourse of like, oh, I can't talk to that teacher about it, but I can talk to the studio manager, or I can talk to, I talk about with dance companies, like a company liaison that's kind of at the peer level, so it doesn't feel like it's escalating, but that then it also rotates, and so that it's not the same person forever and ever, because then it becomes part of the power structure, and then it is an escalation.
Yeah.
And that if one for one contract it's this person, and the next contract it's that person, maybe that person I didn't feel like I could trust, but this person I can. So at least I've got
Yeah.
some outreach points.
Yeah. And I think, to echo a little bit of what you said there, I think a lot of it is just what their past experiences have been. And I think once they've had those experiences where it's like, well, that didn't go well, you know, it's kind of like, well, it's gonna take a lot more effort then for them to then feel comfortable in the future trusting somebody else when they say, oh, I want you to tell me what's going on. The other side of it too, and I know that this is also can be an issue, is on the studio level from the teacher's perspective. All of this is great, but they also have to establish some sort of order in the classroom. Like if everyone's constantly raising their hand, if everyone's constantly, asking to go to the bathroom or doesn't use the bathroom before class, and then in the middle of class, everybody wants to run to the bathroom, or everyone's constantly running off, to take a water break when they're trying to choreograph, like that's not okay either. So I do feel like there has to be some sort of middle ground, or if, there's somebody who's like, oh, I don't want to do this part of class today, and they always conveniently have a headache during that part of class. So it's there has to be a balance with all of this, I do feel. So, I feel for the teachers as well, because I do think that there has to be some sort of discretion that you develop as you work with students to know when to dismiss some of these things as, like if you're asking a question every 5 minutes in class, then if that kid raises their hand when they're legitimately injured or needs something, they may be asked to put their hand down. It may not be intentional on the teacher's part, but if they're constantly asking questions and disrupting the flow of class, then I could see where sometimes that might occur, right? So, what is your advice for teachers trying to navigate both sides of that coin?
I think it's a little bit of what we talked about already around expectations. So I do think one of the principles of both consent forward and trauma informed teaching is choice, right? Giving students choice around engagement. But if I gave them a choice over every single exercise that we had in class, we would get nothing done. But also, they probably wouldn't trust me. It would go back to that like structure thing of their experience. They'd be like, "Why was this dance teacher know what she's doing if she's letting me choose everything?" Right? Like it would go
Yeah.
against all that. So I don't give them a choice on every exercise. I make sure that in each section of class, like the warm up, the technique drills, the combination, the cool down, that at each section there's an opportunity for them to make a choice of like, okay, the warm up's over, do a stretch that you need. Okay, we're working on technique drills. You pick whether this is a double or a triple turn. You want to go for the triple, go for it. You want to nail that double clean landing, you do it, right? That I give those choices built in. So I'm reinforcing you have choice, you have agency, you are in charge of your own learning and classroom experience. And to an extent, I'm still
Mm-hmm.
holding this structure. Um, and then communicating that at an age appropriate level, right? Of like, this is how this class goes. And I'm a big fan of using some of the warm up time to talk about, like, this is the plan for the day. And that can include things like, here's where I'll take questions. Here's, I know we just came back from winter break and everybody has a story. Here's the time where we can share our stories is while we're sitting in our splits on the wall. Everybody can
Mm-hmm.
take a turn, but that's how long we have to hold our splits. So make your story short, right? Like we can come up
Mm-hmm.
with structures that support curiosity and sharing because we do want students to be curious. We do want them to be like, why is a jeté called a jeté? And to be able to explain that because it's going to give them a deeper level of understanding that's going to help them do it better. We do want them to tell us when they don't feel good. And we want to learn to discern when that I don't feel good is I don't feel good, something's really wrong. And when that I don't feel good is I don't want to do that. Is
Mm-hmm.
also that might be valid. Like, why do they have a headache every time we're about to do Petit Allegro or whatever? That's
Mm-hmm.
my least favorite, right? Like, that would be
Yeah.
me. I do not want to do all the little jumps. Again, I'm very tall. It takes a lot to get my legs off the
Mm-hmm.
floor.
Yeah.
Like, why? Because that's probably really useful information to me as a teacher where I could get super frustrated and be like, oh my gosh, this kid just never wants to do that.
Yeah.
As opposed to, what is it that's making them not want to do that? Do they feel like they're really bad at it?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
they're afraid to do it. Did somebody make fun of them one time during this kind of section of class and they're afraid to do it? Did a teacher tell them they were bad at it and they're afraid to do
Right.
it? Right?
Or like, does
Do
their ankle hurt?
Yeah,
And
like
they don't want to tell the
why
teacher.
are they saying these things? Like
Right.
those are different things and kind of entering with the equal support of like structure and curiosity.
Yeah.
And I think we can do it. It just it's not easy. And I know no dance teacher gets paid enough to have the time to think those things through and take classes. And
Yeah,
it's
and
really
to support
important.
each student individually, which is, I think, really hard, especially in like a larger class environment. Like some of that can be really challenging. But I also think that is something that is developed over time with practice. And so, I think a lot of grace needs to be given to the teachers as well,
Yeah.
because as they're learning, like everybody's human, right? But at the same time, it shouldn't be something where there's things happening in the classroom that are, in terms of language that's being used. And I'm not talking about profanity, I'm talking more about like just how corrections are addressed and how it's approached in terms of, how you're calling students out in front of their peers. And then something we haven't touched on, but I do, pun intended, but I do want to talk about because I know you have a good amount of knowledge and background and experience here as well, is physical touch with corrections in class. I am in a profession that requires a lot of physical touch. I know
Yeah.
there's differing opinions on this even within my profession, but consent is huge in terms of putting your hands on somebody. I think again, it's everyone's human. It's a work in progress.
Hmm.
And so people, it's a learned skill. But I think it's an important skill to learn. So, can you speak on that a little bit, just in terms of like what the expectation should be, so that parents who are maybe listening to this and are hearing things about, I think there's a million examples we can give, but I think particularly about acro and flexibility classes where
Mm,
students are being forced into positions or held in positions by their peers or by their teachers, to try to achieve an extreme level of flexibility and things like that. So, yeah, can you
yeah.
speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, I teach a course for NDEO about the ethics of teaching with touch. And in that class, I shared like my touch policy is my class in my classes is that I don't teach with touch. I also teach college students. If I was teaching preschoolers that I had to worry about like hanging on the bar and licking the mirror, I would totally have a different policy because it's a different context, right? No touch policy with preschoolers, maybe not effective. College
Yeah.
students, fine. I think what is nice about having a policy is recognizing context and that there is a different need for different levels of touch and kinds of touch in different classes. Like in an acro class, you do have a spotter, I hope, who
Yes.
who probably will be putting hands on you for safety, for guidance, for alignment, for safety reasons, which is different than being in, maybe a repertory class where the choreographer is demonstrating, but maybe doesn't need to touch you. So context is really important. And knowing that those policies can vary from person to person, from teacher to teacher, what I think shouldn't vary is asking for consent. Whether that's every single time we're approaching, people are like, that takes a lot of time. I mean, it really doesn't. Can I touch you? Does not take that long. Um, but and most of the time when I'm teaching, like I'm in front of the room or I'm across the room and they're coming through, right? So like I've got that crossing time where I can ask the question. And I have in my book like the whole formula of how you ask the question because I think there's more consentful ways of asking than not. Um, but it reinforces for students that they should not have the expectation that their body is available to other people. They should not. And teachers should not have the expectation that just because a student is in dance class means that they want to be touched. Those are entirely different things. And our touch doesn't always teach. It doesn't always communicate the things that we think that it does. Sometimes when I put a student into a position or a shape, they've lost the connection to their own body and they don't know how they got there because I put them there. And so then they can't replicate it. They might be in it for a second, but they still haven't actually learned the thing
Yeah.
because they didn't get the progression. Sometimes a student may have a trauma response where they dissociate and shut down from a touch, and then they're not learning in class at all because they're totally checked out. The student I touch might be fine, but that student over there might be watching me do that touch and be like, she never touches me. She must not like me. One of those like expectations things
Yeah.
because I haven't made it clear to students why I touch, what the purpose is, right? Am I trying to touch every student to just make sure that they get one hands-on correction? Fine. Is the purpose of this touch to get us into alignment because we were unsafe? Is it a high five that we're encouraging? Do I only touch students who maybe aren't getting it through verbal cues, so I'm trying to meet them in a different learning style? Right? I can't again tell this to preschoolers, but I can absolutely tell those kinds of things to middle school, high school, college students, and we can
Yeah.
have a real discussion about why do we touch? When is touch helpful? When is it not helpful? When can I, as the teacher, let go of touch and like have them do it with a partner and get that touch? I do that often in ballet class of, having them do the movement with a partner and then their partner giving a touch. Or it's like, when can I, as a teacher, find a different way of doing something that I usually do? And I always use my big exercise ball that I have over here as like an example. It's like we could do weight sharing back to back with a partner in modern dance class, but I could also do weight sharing with a ball and then I don't have to touch anybody if I don't want to touch anybody. Or I can offer them as equal options. So I think communicating the expectations around touch, and if touch is part of your teaching method as a teacher, are we giving students opportunities to opt out of that touch when it's not a safety issue? Like I have something in my touch policy of like, I do not use touch unless it is a safety issue, right? Like
Yeah.
that's always going to be in my policy because there might be times that we really need that. And I'm going to put a period on that, but I haven't forgotten the like forcing forcing students into things in like acro and flexibility class. I'm just going to
Mhm.
period the like touch in general before I shift into that
Yeah.
specific thought. The acro and flexibility one, like social media has not been our friend on that, right? Because we get
Right.
these videos of like students sitting on other students and teachers sitting on
Hmm.
students, and then people being like, "Oh my gosh, I wish somebody would do that to me." And I'm like, "You do not."
Mm-mm.
Uh, that's how you end up very, very injured. So proper training for teachers who are teaching those skills of like what is really available in bodies in different stages of development
Yes,
because
that is
that's
huge.
different.
Yes, it is.
Like we what we can do with small children is different than what we can do with middle school students is different than high
Hmm.
school students. So like please take some developmental movement classes and
Please.
some training on that. So I think that's one. And then teaching students when we're talking about like self-advocacy, the difference between discomfort and unsafety. And I think this is a reason that sometimes dance teachers are afraid of being like, I can't tell my kids they can tell me no, because then they'll never try anything, they'll never do
Right.
anything. And I'm like, I don't actually think that's true because most dancers that I know are like, I'm gonna try it. And
Hmm.
many of them jump in and try things that maybe they shouldn't, but they're
Yeah.
usually game to try stuff. So I think it's really important that we give them those discernment skills of like, when am I unsafe versus when am I uncomfortable? Because those are different, but we
Hmm.
don't necessarily talk about them as different. And I have in the book what I call the bubbles, and I talk about being in your confidence zone. And like when I'm in my confidence zone, I can go on stage and do this right now. Like I feel good.
Yeah.
I'm ready to go. But that's not where we spend most of our time as dancers. Like
Mm.
we're there, a couple days. That's
Yeah.
it. Like we hope we're there by dress rehearsal and
Yep.
then we go do the thing. That's not where we spend most of our
Yeah.
time. Where we spend most of our time is what I call the stretch zone and then the learning zone. That's where we spend most of our time. And I love talking with dancers about this because I'm like, do your favorite stretch. And everybody listening, you can go do this right now. Like, do your favorite stretch. And your favorite stretch is not comfortable. At least it shouldn't be, because then you're not actually stretching. Then you're sitting
Mm.
comfortably, so pick something different. But your favorite stretch has a level of discomfort to it because it's creating change in your body. That's the purpose of a stretch. And actual things are happening inside your body to make that change. So it's not comfortable. Like it hurts so good.
Right.
There's a
Yeah.
level of discomfort, but we don't feel unsafe. We know we can tolerate it in the stretch because we know that it's going to last for like a set amount of time and that's going to be done. And we're willing to do it because we want the change that comes after. We're willing to
Mhm.
tolerate that bit of discomfort for a small amount of time because we know it's making change. But if we never talk to students about, like, okay, this is what discomfort feels like, that your body
Mhm.
can still sustain, that you can still breathe normally, that when you get out of this stretch, you can move normally and you don't feel like you're stuck anywhere. Like, we need to give them those skills to
Yeah.
learn that somatic cue of discomfort versus pain because our body also does the same sorts of reactions when we're experiencing mental and emotional unsafety or discomfort. And dancers can learn it physically and then start to take those skills in of like, am I unsafe or am I uncomfortable?
Yeah. That's
And if I'm
huge.
unsafe, I need to speak up.
Yep.
And if I'm uncomfortable, I can tolerate it. And there might come a point in the discomfort where I'm like, that's too much and I'm now going to unsafe.
Mhm.
But we need to teach those skills. And I think I don't think that we're necessarily afraid to as teachers. I think we're afraid that will take too much time. We're afraid of losing time on teaching those skills. But I think we feel like, how could we possibly know? Because it's an embodied personal experience, which
Yeah.
is actually why we have to give time for it for
Yeah.
students to build those skills. Because if we're not, where are they learning it?
Yeah. I agree. And I love that point. I actually have a flexibility workshop that I teach, and a good portion of the workshop is teaching the difference in different like sensations in your body and actually like putting them in positions that are going to put like a muscle on stretch versus a nerve. And so helping them understand if you're stretching or if you're working on flexibility or an acro movement or like whatever, and you're at the end of your range of motion, this is an acceptable level of discomfort, number one. Number two, if you're feeling this sensation, this you're not stretching a muscle. If you're feeling this sensation, you're at the end of the joints range of motion and you're likely only stretching ligaments, which are not good. So you need to get out of that right away. So what does a bony block feel like? What does a muscle stretch feel like? What does a neural stretch feel like? What does like a fascial stretch feel like? And so helping them discern, because they don't know. Kids have no idea. They have no idea of what those different sensations feel like or how to discern the difference between them or that they should discern a difference between them. They also have very limited pain experiences, and that is going to differ from every child to the next based on their lived experience and their individualized pain experiences. Some kids have a really high pain tolerance. Some kids have very little pain tolerance. So it's very hard as an external provider to tell, if someone's coming in and they're telling me I'm in a lot of pain, that is their perception of their symptoms. And it's not incorrect, but their 5 to 6 out of 10 pain, maybe if I were to superimpose that on my body, may only be like a 2 out of 10. Whereas like someone else's 5 to 6 out of 10, if I superimpose it on my body, might be like a 7 out of 10. It's all very subjective. So I think that that's so important. And I think that's a piece that is missed a lot of the time. Um, but, and again, I don't think there's sometimes where I don't think that especially dancers and parents of dancers even know that they should be aware of those things. It's just something you don't know what you don't know. And so for me, that's where a lot of this kind of comes in is in terms of that like individual agency and advocacy is they don't know the appropriate time to speak up and say, "Hey, this is unsafe." They don't know what unsafe is. They've not been educated on like this is acceptable, this is unacceptable. And so I think you like add all of those things together and it's just like, you know, it doesn't make for a good situation. So, but I want to also touch on something else that we haven't really gotten into too much, which is like trauma informed
Mm-hmm.
teaching and just kind of the basis of it. And that's another, I think consent kind of leads us there in a sense, because you had alluded to it a little bit in your example before. But trauma informed teaching in terms of people's experiences and how that's going to influence how they learn in the classroom and how certain cues, whether they be verbal or physical, may influence a student's response in the classroom or how they learn.
So what I think is interesting for me as a teacher is that like consent forward work and trauma informed work are not a Venn diagram where I'm looking for a sweet spot. Like it's just a circle.
Yeah,
If
it just
we,
overlaps.
it's just
Yeah.
there because when someone's experienced a trauma, they have they had no agency in that moment. Like nobody chooses trauma. That is something that is enacted upon
Mm-hmm.
you.
Yeah.
So they've lost a sense of agency. So everything we can do to bring back agency and give opportunities for agency and consent is helpful in terms of not re-traumatizing
Yeah.
students. What's really challenging in trauma-informed teaching is that there's not a checklist. And that
Mm-hmm.
would be really helpful if I could just be
Yeah.
like, do this and you'll be trauma informed and it'll be great. Because like that feeling of like pain, pain versus discomfort, unsafety versus discomfort, it's really individual. You know, and we think about like the example of a car accident is a traumatic event for some people.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, they're in a car accident and they're like, well, what a crappy day.
Yeah.
Right? And people can be in the same accident and have entirely different reactions and effects because of their own physical, emotional support systems and resources for dealing with that trauma. So we cannot know as teachers all of the past experiences that people are coming in with and how anything is going to sit with any of those people and their past experiences. What we can do is notice changes of like, wow, that person is reacting really withdrawn today, or is making a lot of jokes that seem to have a lot of high energy than when they usually come to class very like focused and disciplined. Noticing changes and getting curious about what's going on with those changes for students. Um, and then some things that are just generally trauma informed practices becoming part of our regular teaching practices. So, like noticing when students change and being curious about that behavioral change. Is there a way that we're activating them? But what are some things that we can do? And one is like asking before we touch students.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Words that we use being body inclusive and gender inclusive. And that can be very activating for folks. If we're going to be making a dance about a sensitive topic, that we make sure that we have time to talk about why that's important, but how that might affect us. When I was teaching middle school, you know, their project was always to make a dance for the end of the year. Every student made a solo, and middle schoolers are going through some stuff. Like middle school is hard.
I have two of them right now. It is like, let me tell you something. I mean, I remember, but like having to girls in middle school currently, I can tell you, yes, 1,000%. It is, and even in the dance studio, dynamics
Yeah.
change within like the same group of kids, and it is rough. It is rough. So yes.
Yeah, and the last time I taught middle school was actually 2020, 2021.
Ooh, that was a rough time.
We were virtual for a part of that time, and so students were having such different experiences and that they were online a lot more. They were having experiences of being online that were healthy and not healthy. Dancers in general have body experiences that are healthy or not healthy, and I
Yeah.
had students that wanted to make dances about all of these things. And I'm never going to tell an artist not to make the art you want to make. I
Hmm.
am going to say, how are we resourcing you as an artist to be able to take care of you and to put your art away when the art making time is over so that you can like go to math class
Right.
and not
Yeah.
take that with you. But how do we also take care of our audience? Because as an artist, I should want to take care of my audience. And that doesn't mean baby them, it means inform them so that they can enter with the same courage that I'm entering this art making. And that if it isn't right for them, that I'm giving them the opportunity to leave because I don't want to traumatize anybody as an artist either. And
Right.
so in middle school, these kids were so amazing. We did closure practices. They each created a closure practice for the end of their choreography time. And for one, it was taking her hair down. She'd put her hair up for dance class in a nice bun, and then she'd take it down and she'd shake it out, and that was her like shaking out that theme and just transitioning her body physically to go to the next thing. For one, it was taking off her ballet shoes. She's like, I've got to change my shoes anyway. I'm just going to be really mindful about how I do it and be like, and now this is done. For one, it was turning off the Zoom. And once the Zoom was off, that was her brain body signal that we don't think about that thing again. And if it pops up, we go, yep, that's not the time for that. And they each had to create a closure practice, and that was part of their final project was their dance, but they had to turn in a little paper about like why this dance, all these things. And they had
Yeah.
to include that in that. And for when we shared the dances, if they had a dance about a sensitive topic, well, they had to create a content advisory where they could give
Mhm.
people the opportunity to turn off their Zoom or leave the room before they shared their dance because we want to take care of each other as
Yeah.
artists. And it's like we can do those things, and yes, they take a little bit of time. It doesn't really take that much time, right? Kids were able to do that in the changeover between classes. It's not a huge production to have a closure practice, but it's a way that I'm reminding them as a teacher that like things can be activating. And maybe you're
Mhm.
fine one day and you're not the next day because of whatever happened or you heard on the news. And that's
Yeah.
normal and that's fine. And we're building resources to deal with that. And we're going to normalize the fact that other people have things that make them feel not fine.
Yep.
And we're going to give them resources to deal with it.
Yeah. And I think that's a great way to approach it. I think that's a great skill set for those kids to also learn. And I think part of it too is, and there's this is not necessarily something I think that is going to be taught exclusively at the dance studio or may not even be super appropriate, but um I mean in class at least, just being mindful that everybody has bad days and like just leading with kindness always. I think that starts obviously in the home, but I think dance teachers and studio owners can also help to reinforce that, especially, I mean, at all age levels, but I would say, especially in the middle school age level, I think is where we start to see some degrading of friendships and like, shifts in dynamics, and not necessarily at the fault of anyone. I think at that age, it's really difficult for them to process a lot of that shifting in dynamics. And so you add in the power dynamics, as we were talking about, of just the studio situation, especially within groups of kids, where again, perception, it all comes back to their perception of roles that are given, or parts that are given, or things like that, or group assignments, or whatever it might be. And their perception of why some of those things are occurring may look completely different than reality. And so again, that's where I think as teachers, choreographers, whatever, it can be helpful to create context where it's needed. I don't think anything needs to be over explained ever, and some things don't really require explanation. But maybe this is also where parents could be aware of the fact that these are why some of these things occur, right? We talked before about spacing and like, you're tall, so you were always in the back because of your height, because of no other reason. And I think as a parent, I'm aware of that now, but as my daughter was starting to compete and was involved in more dances, I didn't know that right away. Why would I know that? I have no way of knowing that. I wasn't a dancer, right? So then if my kid is upset about why she's in the back of the dance, I don't even know what to say to her, right? Like, I don't know to say, oh, well, maybe it's because you're tall, right? Like, and this is typically how formations are made. How amazing would it be if we all just had that knowledge that we could pass on to our children to say, actually, it's quite simple. It's not that your teacher doesn't like you. This is how formations are put together. Now, like, does every choreographer have to pull every parent aside and explain that? No. But that's why I feel like forums like this are helpful, right? So we can have these conversations. I think if some of that education of just how things work for the average consumer, and I feel like the more people understand some of these things, the more some of these things become, minimal in terms of their impact on the dancer.
Yeah.
So
Expectations. Just
it's all
communicate.
expectations. Exactly. Expectations. I think knowledge is power, just like understanding things again. I think like a lot of these conversations are so important just to allow people to educate themselves and to
Yeah.
understand a little bit more. So definitely appreciate your perspective on a lot of these things, because I think
Thanks.
that it adds a lot of context, and context is definitely important. Um, is there anything else that you feel is important for the audience to know, or
Hmm.
that you would like to share?
This is the thought I had earlier when we were talking about like teachers communicating things to students and like when students ask questions.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to say you don't know, and how
Yeah.
powerful that is actually for students when an adult in their life who they see as an expert doesn't know something. I think I gave the example of like, why is a jete called a jete? Like, okay, we want to explain it to them so that they understand it better. But say if they're asking something and we don't know, we need to understand it better. And to be like, look at us all learning. Look at us
Mm-hmm.
all learning together. And I talk to students a lot about like, you see me as the expert in this room, and I am in this subject matter simply because I've had more time with it than you.
Yeah.
Like, that's really my expertise is earned, right? But also, you're the expert in your own body and in
Mm-hmm.
your own experience of this subject, modern dance, ballet, whatever, that we're exploring together. And I want you to bring your expertise to this room. And when we say things as teachers like, I don't know, let's find out, or
Mm-hmm.
wow, that's some learning that I need to do too. It reinforces that idea of like we are all experts in our own way. We're all bringing things that we need to learn into this space as well,
Yeah.
and it can give students the opportunity then to feel like the adults don't have all the power. The adults don't have all the answers. That maybe those times
Mm-hmm.
that they're feeling those power dynamics really strongly, to remember like I bet there's something this person doesn't know. Not in a challenging way, but just so
Yeah.
like it helps diffuse some of that power dynamic, like as a ripple effect when
Yeah.
we can admit we don't know. And I think very often dance teachers are afraid to say we don't know. Um, One, because we start teaching dance when we're really, really young. And we're
Mm-hmm.
afraid to say we don't know because then our youth is like working against us, and we're like, oh, they're gonna fire me because they think I don't know things, right? And then in academic spaces, we're like, oh my gosh, my colleagues don't take me seriously because I'm not teaching a real subject like, math or some physics,
Right.
right? The ones I brought up earlier, like they don't take me seriously already. So I can't say I don't know something. Like I think we have that societal pressure around the words I don't know, but
Yeah.
it is so freeing for us as teachers and for our students.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's so funny because that just triggered like a thought in my brain too when I was in school, or maybe it was even before that. I don't know, but I did some public speaking when I was younger, and I think one of the things that we were taught was if someone asks you a question that you don't know the answer to, just be honest and say, I don't know, but I would be happy to find that information and get back to you. And so I think that's something that was kind of ingrained to me at a younger age, but it's so true. It's so uncomfortable to have to say that, number one, if you don't have the answer. But I think it's so important because, as you mentioned, I mean, it can be very empowering for someone to realize, oh, there's things you don't know too. Nobody can possibly know everything. And I think it just kind of makes us all more human, you know, definitely to
Yeah,
those kiddos too. Yeah.
right. When we're teaching dance, we're really just teaching humans, like
Yeah,
have some
exactly.
humans.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
your insight and joining me to chat about all of this today. Why don't
Thank
you tell
you.
everybody where they can find you online
Mhm.
and where they can find your book?
Yeah, so you can find me online. My website is my name, NicolePerry.org. And then I also am the founder of Momentum Stage, and that website is momentumstage.org. And Momentum Stage is a professional development company, nonprofit, for theater and dance teachers. And we offer every month a workshop, a 90-minute workshop on a sliding scale for theater and dance teachers on a professional development topic. Sometimes it's a movement modality, sometimes it's like a hot topic kind of thing. And on
Amazing.
both of those websites are linked to my book, which is called Careful Creativity in Theater and Dance Education, Consent Forward, Trauma Informed, Psychologically Safe Movement Pedagogy, with a beautiful photo of some dancers that I worked with as the cover.
I love
And you
that.
can get that from Routledge, which is the publisher. You can get that on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, or you can follow the links on either of those websites that I mentioned, NicolePerry.org or MomentumStage.org.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And
Thank you.
I appreciate your time with our audience here. And everybody go look for Nicole's book. And
Buy it for
it
the
sounds
dance
like
teacher in your life.
exactly. Yeah, there's a lot to be learned. I think even just for the non-dance teacher, it sounds like everybody can learn from your insight. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned something. Please be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Also, make sure you head over to Instagram and YouTube and follow us there. Send us your listener questions, topic suggestions, and feedback at drdancemompodcast@gmail.com. That's Dr. fully written out, Dance Mom Podcast, also fully written out, at gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening.